Hey everyone, really excited to introduce you today to Brigham Tomco. This is the Achieving Greatness Show, and we're really excited to jump in. So Brigham, thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't we jump in? Let's get started with some of your story and how you got to where you're at. Your LinkedIn is amazing with all of the things you've done and businesses you've owned and places you've worked. Where did you start and how did you get to where you're at now?
Yeah, it's funny. This is probably going back a little further than you would normally expect in a discussion like this. But to me, I think it actually goes all the way back to when I was 10 years old. I grew up one of 10 kids in a lower middle class family, and that's where my entrepreneurial roots began. I wanted to play football, but football cost $200, and my parents said, "Sorry, you can't play, but if you can come up with the money, then you can play." And as a 10-year-old, I had to get creative. I wanted to play so bad, and so I figured out, went to all the neighbors in the neighborhood and said, "Hey, if you go on vacation, I'll be the guy that watches your animals and feeds them." And I saved up $200 and was able to play football that year. And football was always a passion of mine. I played through high school and college and loved it. But the more important lesson that I realized was that if I wanted something, I could go and work for it. And I learned that at a really young age. And I had my first W-2 job when I was 11. I would
Wow.
ride my bike about a mile and a half down some hills and up some hills in Seattle. So it was rainy all the time too. And I would go to this dog kennel and walk dogs around this track, to give them exercise. So I think a lot of my entrepreneurial roots kind of started all the way back there when you have a vision of, I can work to go get it, and if I'm creative, I can find ways to make more money with my time, and that sort of continued throughout high school with some of the businesses that I started, and then I started 3 companies during my undergrad and graduate school. I got a degree in accounting, then my law degree and MBA, but I started 3 different companies that raised capital from 1 from angel investors, 2 from venture capital, and more institutional investors. And it was just sort of always building and growing businesses. And one of the backers of those businesses, they had sold their business and asked me to come start their family investment office with them in New York. And so in my late 20s, I was able to get great exposure to the investor side of entrepreneurship. And when I turned 30, I called my early life crisis. That's when I kind of left New York and started the current path that I'm on.
Awesome. So you have an accounting degree, you have a law degree, you have a master's in business, and you started off walking dogs. Is there
Yeah.
like a certain passion that's kind of strung through all of those years that's led you to where you're at now?
Yeah, I think definitely. I learned really young that the only person that was probably going to ever pay me what I thought I was worth was myself. And so that always drove me as an entrepreneur, because I realized if I could, when I was young, it was about if I worked harder or faster, and if I did jobs and bid them out by the job, I could get more dollars per hour by working harder. And so that was sort of the first way. But as you progress, my mind expanded and said, well, not working harder isn't the only way to make more money. There's the working smarter. And so in high school, I'd go bid out big maintenance or landscaping jobs. I'd hire 2 or 3 of my friends. I would put them at an hourly rate, but I'd bid the job out at a job rate. And so they got $10 an hour. But when the jobs would get done, as a high school kid, I would end up, if you backed into the numbers, making $25 or $30 an hour. And
Wow,
so
you were doing
I
that
think
in
that,
high school.
yeah, so I think that passion about working harder was there, and then working smarter. And so I think, I've, until Emmersion, which I'm running now, I haven't ever really been super passionate about the businesses themselves that I've done. My passion there was about efficiency and solving a problem, and you know, bringing a great solution to the market, and you know, sort of the game of business was fun for me.
Yeah.
And so that's what's kept me driven the whole time. But you know, I turned 40 last year, and I'm probably more driven and more excited than I've ever been about any of my businesses, because I get to do that. Plus, I'm passionate about what we're doing, reshaping language learning and language education and assessment globally. It was something that I enjoy what I'm doing, along with the game of business itself.
That's awesome. It's actually hard to get to that point. A lot of
Yeah,
us just get stuck in a job or a career that was convenient. Now we're working in it forever.
yeah. Well, that's a great point. When I was in New York, I felt like I needed to transition back to being an entrepreneur, because that's what was in my blood. And I remember for about 6 months, the thought process in my head is, when I find a business idea or a business that I'm passionate about, you know, I'm going to go and build that. And after a few months, I realized that many of the things that I was personally passionate about weren't great businesses. And and that's really when I
Dang.
had to do some introspection and realize that what I really loved was just the idea of finding a problem in the marketplace, figuring out a great solution that people are willing to pay for, and then creating a business around that. That was fun for me. It almost, you know, outside of illegal and vices and different things, it almost didn't matter what the business itself was. I loved, you know, that process of ideation and validation, and then building, you know, a team and a business around it.
It's such
So it
a
almost didn't matter what I did when I
yeah,
realized that was my real passion.
it sounds like you have a creative aspect to you, or you need like a creative outlet to build something, solve a problem from scratch, in so many
Yeah.
words.
Yeah, and I, you know, this is, I know ADD is a real thing, so I don't want to make light of it, but I, in some ways, feel like I have professional ADD, where for a lot of my career, like I was always, I had to be doing 2 or 3 or 4 things at a time. You know, I did my JD MBA, and during the last year and a half of it, traveled and worked in New York 2 days a week, and came back, and I was always doing multiple things at once. And so there definitely is that sense of, you know, sort of building, and then what's the next thing to you know, to build upon after that. And so I always kept a list. I still do. I have a spreadsheet of business ideas. What I did realize is I can't be a shiny object chaser, like you know, they talk about raccoons and they get their hands caught in the traps because they're
Can't let go
chasing
of it.
stuff. So I have to make sure I don't do that. So that's why I kind of keep this list as an outlet, so I can stay focused. But most of the business I started 10 since I left New York and bought 3,
Wow.
were on that list at some point, maybe years before I ever even either bought or started a business in that space, because um, you know, good ideas come, but it's not always the right time to go execute on them. And
Right.
so I kind of built that, and then when the opportunity and the right people presented themselves to go start something, you know, you can go back to that list.
Can you talk a little bit about today, Emerson, and if you've got some interest in some of those other 3, the Xylan and your other companies that you're a part of, or if you recently were a part of, can you talk a little bit about those and the timeline through those, what got you started, and give us kind of like a storyline?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, and maybe I'll go chronologically, starting, you know, back in time and come forward. But yeah, Emmersion right now is the current business that we're focused on. But when I left New York, I looked at buying a business, I looked at starting a venture capital fund, and I looked at starting a business. And it was kind of a funny process. And I was lucky when I left New York, the family that I worked for paid me for another 6 months to advise on the portfolio. So it gives me a little bit of a soft transition or landing. But I didn't have the idea bought, the business bought, or the idea out, or the fund started by the time that money ran out. And I remember going to my wife and saying, "Can I start a business just one more time?" It's been 10 since then. But I wanted to make sure she was good with it. And so my co-founder of Xylem Staffing, which is now Codev, David Casteller, good friend of mine, he had a digital marketing agency that he pulled me into, and the Xylem Staffing was actually a business started to solve a problem we had in that company. We were using offshore resources, and there was a storm in the Philippines, and our designer couldn't reach out to us for like 2 weeks. He was in some island, and we're like, wow, this doesn't work for scaling a business. It's cool to have this inexpensive labor. And then we tried to scale and add 2 or 3 more, and we couldn't find them. And so Xylem Staffing came up as an idea that there's a lot of companies that want an offshore dedicated office, but they're not big enough to go build that, company. But how can they get enterprise infrastructure and recruiting and all these things? So we built a company to do that for other companies. So
Wow.
our company, Oxen Media, was our first customer, and then we added customers from there, and we grew it to about 500 employees in the first year. We sold off most of the operation, and then restarted again with a specific focus on building teams of software developers. And so I ran that until 2015, and we rebranded as Codev, and then Tony Morrison stepped in as CEO. I continued to own it, and we grew that to about 300 software developers.
Wow.
When I sold that about a month and a half ago.
Oh, wow. Really? Congrats.
And so thank you. It was fun to get to that point, and it was great to have some of the great management team that I built up participated in that deal, and it was led by someone who's become a good friend of mine. And so I can continue to watch and root for that business, even though I'm not owning it or running it on a daily basis.
And when did you start that business?
Started that in 2010, and so we ran that as a great cash flowing business for all of that time, and it really created a foundation for me to build and buy other businesses. So we sold a couple of the digital marketing agency. We sold. We had about 300 e-commerce websites that we sold.
300?
Yeah, the high volume. This was early days of SEO and such, and we just sold a variety of products. We just had a algorithm that we'd go search Amazon. If there were products that hit certain parameters, we'd build a website and start selling those products just as a reseller for eBay or Amazon. Whoa. If the traction got going, we would try to source product directly. But it was.
So would you drop ship it basically from eBay or from Amazon?
Yeah, and then
wow.
Then if we'd still do outside fulfillment, even if we progressed to where we were sourcing product directly. We never held inventory. Wow. But that's where it's about 2014, 2015 timeframe. I'd been on the President's Council at BYU Idaho for years with Kim Clark and then Clark Gilbert and now Henry Eyring. But the university was growing, but jobs locally weren't. So I said, what can I do to build jobs in Southeast Idaho? And so I started a market research company. So we've had about 250 or 300 students work at any given time for us. Since we've started, we've had a few thousand students work for us. So that company is called Clear Insights. It does market research for companies like Net Promoter Score, customer satisfaction surveys, and then we do a lot of political research and political polling. And so right now we're right in the middle. We're killing it because presidential election, and we're one of the few people in America that benefits from a never-ending political cycle because we're doing all the polls and tracking for that. So
are these telephone polls?
Yeah. So it's mostly telephone. We do digital or online research as well, but our specialty is in the phone-based market research space. And the CEO, Jeff Welch, that runs that is one of the top executives in the industry. He was president of a company called Western Watts that became Opinionology locally in Utah that probably many of our listeners worked for at some point when they were going up through high school and college in one of the local call centers. But he's a great leader of that business. And, depending on time of year and election cycle, that business probably fluctuates between 300 and 500 part-time employees. And we
Wow.
usually locate our offices in rural college towns to benefit the colleges, but we get the benefit of really smart workforce working for us in that business.
So it started up there in Rexburg. Do you have offices in other locations yet?
Yeah. So we have a big office in Pocatello. We're headquartered in Lehigh. Depending on time of year and seasonality, we've had offices in Cedar City, Price, Ephraim, and Salt Lake.
Wow.
We'll spin up offices for election cycles and different things. We also do some of the work offshore in the Philippines for that business.
Cool.
As well.
What an interesting thing to have built up. I know Ron Lindorf, one of our professors at BYU, was in that business.
Yeah, Ron was the founder of Western Watts. So the guy that runs our company worked for Ron as they built that up over the years.
Oh, all right. That's cool. Yeah. Small world.
Yeah. So it's fun. We also have made 2 acquisitions into that business over the years. So we've built it organically, but also built it through acquisition. So for me, it's a fun mix of my entrepreneur life and my New York investment life. I get to kind of integrate those into one.
Got it. That's awesome. So since then, do you still have a Xylan business, or is that gone?
Yeah. So Xylan Global is the holding company. So it owns my interest or when I had Codev, it was the ownership of Codev. It's the ownership of Clear Insights. It's the one that made the acquisitions. We run a lot of the debt and sort of credit through that entity because it has more established business history. We actually launched Emmersion, which I'm running now through there. It's now been spun out, but Xylan Global is a venture investor into those businesses
cool.
as well. It also owns commercial real estate and other things. So it's the holdco. But right now my sole focus is on Emmersion since May of 2019.
Okay.
Jeff Welch has been running Clear Insights since 2017. Tony Morrison has been running Codev since 2015, and I've sold that. And I've kind of simplified all my other investments so that I can focus, because we talked earlier about how I kind of have professional ADD. What I've realized through my career, though, is that if you really want to do well, you need to focus. And so I cleaned up sort of the variety of things I was doing from the investment side and said, the only way I'm going to come back as a full-time CEO is if I can really be a full-time CEO. And so I have a property manager on the real estate and a controller that manages kind of the financials on that so that I can focus on building Emmersion. And that's really where my passion is, where it's a true B2B SaaS play. We use artificial intelligence. We're in learning and assessment on the language side, and to me, it's the most exciting thing I've done in my career. And I'm glad after so many things, I'm still finding really exciting things that get me passionate and excited to build.
So what is it about this particular business that you're so passionate about? Is it just that you're able to finally focus on one thing?
A little bit. So in 2018, I kind of took time off. I got CEOs in to run my businesses, and for a couple of years, I just helped operate those or helped advise, and made 3 acquisitions during that time. But I had time to step back and say, what am I really passionate about? And as I looked at boards that I was getting asked to be put on, I had to build a set of criteria, and so I came up with 5 things that were most important to me, and God and family were tops for me, but then education, mentorship, and economic development. So I said, if I'm going to work on things going forward, they have to support those 5 things, but particularly on a board perspective, if they're not related to education, economic development, or mentorship, then I'm not going to do it. I just don't have enough time. And so I'm on the board that oversees the trust lands and the trust funds for education in Utah. It's a few $1 billion and 3 million acres. There's an advocacy committee that I'm on, so it's for the state. I was on the board of USTAR, so Utah Science, Technology, and Research. I'm on a couple of boards at UVU and help them as an advisor and a board member for the Wolverine Fund and BYU Idaho all this time. But as I looked at Emmersion, it's education. I think the number one way for people globally to improve themselves economically is to learn English and gain technical skills. So I get to hit that economic development button. And then mentorship, a lot of what we're doing is on the assessment side, we're allowing learning, and Emmersion has an education component as well. And so it actually checked my education box, my economic development box, my mentorship box. And so when I look at this business, I talk about it as a for-profit social venture in my mind.
Wow.
You know, we're focused on building a great business, but I really think the outcome of what we're building is improving people's, you know, economic situations and opportunity for learning and employment going on. So that's what has me passionate. So I'm building a great business, but at the same time, it is involved in all of the boxes, you know, that I checked as things that I wanted to do. So I feel blessed to have finally found that sort of meeting of my two passions around business in general, and then the things that I care about in the world. So that's what has me most excited.
That's awesome. That is, I think we were kind of mentioning this earlier in the chat. It's such a rare thing to find that. And it's really awesome to see you get to this point. I think what I really like about what your story is you've persisted through so many different businesses and so many different channels and I'm sure you've had so many challenges to get to where you're at now. Can you speak about maybe the biggest challenge that maybe you were facing and you thought, oh my gosh, this is the end? Or at what point did you feel like was your lowest low amongst all of these ventures that you've taken?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think to be an entrepreneur, you have to have a lot of optimism and faith and a little bit, you know, type A personality. And so I often joke with people that I became a good entrepreneur because of my type A personality and my naivety. I didn't know what I was getting into a lot of the time. I just said, I can do anything, and I go do it, and you just keep working at it until it happens. And so most of the businesses I've been in, I was never in that industry before, or, you know, I'd never even been to the Philippines before we went and set up a business there. Wow. And just stayed there a month and figured it out. And so, so I think a lot of that persistence, I think I'll be honest, I'm pretty optimistic, so I haven't had any horrible lows, but I do remember a turning point. This was probably, just thinking back, it would have been 2013 or 2014. And, you know, it's one of those times where you thought your business had made it, started being cash flow positive, and I was making a good living. And there was a month just from cash flow timing reasons where we were still cash flow positive in that month and EBITDA positive, but I had to write a $50,000 check to make payroll just because of timing of the payment, and it was an early payroll because of weekend and this and that. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm like fully personally guaranteed on, you know, X million of, you know, debt. I have 500 people who are dependent on me making good decisions and being successful. And man, I could go bankrupt. You know, I'm an entrepreneur. And when I go bankrupt, I'm like cross collateralized, personal guaranteed by, like, you know, everything I owned felt like it was owned by 3 other people at the time, just because I was starting business.
Right.
But the breakthrough for me is I walked through. I said, okay, if I go bankrupt, what does that really mean? I'm like, I might lose my business, I might lose my
Oh
house,
man.
yeah, I could lose cars, but the things that were most important to me, my family and my beliefs and all those things, were still there. And I had this realization that, you know what, the worst case scenario of this business, I don't lose the things that are most important to me. And it gave me sort of confidence, just to run forward and do the best I can and not have that lurking, fear in the back of my mind that entrepreneurs often have. And that's been very liberating. But I was, I'd started 5 companies by then, and been through a lot before I had that realization. So I think the sooner you realize that failure in a business isn't failure in life, it gives you a lot of confidence going forward, and you can relax a little bit, in terms of you know uh, giving yourself a break and just enjoying life more.
Brigham, I wanna ask you about that a little bit more, because I think that's such a under discussed topic. So many of us are always talking about your revenue and your growth and the business. What is it? What do you do? What do you do to nurture those other areas of your life? And how did you get to that mental state of, even if my business fails, I didn't fail in life? And what have you been doing, and what are you doing now to keep that in a healthy state?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Great question. I think it's something that evolves and builds throughout your life, but I think some of it goes back to, I kind of mentioned, I came up with that list of 5 things that were really important to me, and that I tried to use as a barometer as I was spending time or money on things. And none of those were related to my business success. So I think taking a step back and saying, what is success in life for me? What do I really care about? I want a healthy family, happy family. I want them to have opportunities for education and different things. And if we go and list those things, most of the time they're not tied to my business success. If you listed your top 3 or even 5 things, they're probably unrelated. And so I think I wrote those down. I had a personal mission statement, and just so I have something to remind myself of what really mattered. That doesn't mean my business doesn't matter to me, and all the people that work for me and work with me don't matter. But I think it helps you keep that perspective and balance as you go forward. I think the other thing is just to, I joke that I'm an overeducated entrepreneur. I went to school for a long time, but it gave me a lot of chance to study and meet other people. But if you go look at successful people throughout history, most of them had many failures before becoming successful at the thing we know them successful for, and usually don't hear about them during their failure phase. And so you just assume these successful people were always successful. And I think gaining perspective and reading through and getting stories about that and talking to people about when a business went wrong. And I think we have little failures all the time within our businesses. Codev turned out to be a great business, kind of 7-figure EBITDA business for many years for me. But I still remember I really thought this fractional virtual personal assistant idea was just going to kill it, because I was using one to help me. And so we built a product or product offering around this, and pushed it for about a year. We probably got 20 clients. It became a probably $250,000 revenue stream. But we pushed it and built it, and then we did the analysis on what we were making. It was negative margin if we fully loaded overhead to those positions. And but I mean, overall, it actually created contribution margins, so we didn't really lose money. But I mean, if we really looked at, if we're going to spend time and effort on something, I just pushed through the lowest margin thing we've ever done. And so we didn't fail from losing money or whatever, but that was a wrong decision, and I had to own up to it. And it's funny, even years after, we still had some of those clients. And one of the documents we always looked at in our monthly review was profitability per customer. And I could always own that the lowest percentage profitability ones were deals that I'd done on that ill-fated. So even within successful ventures, you have failures all the time. The good thing for us was we learned from that and said, well, let's identify the highest profit margin positions or activities, and we'll focus all of our energy on those. And that was a great lesson we learned from that. And it, for the next 5 years of growth, we were much more focused on, how we calculate overhead and profitability of different mandates and focusing our efforts there. And so it's really about learning from the failure and turning that into, a positive gain on the business, whether it's in that current one or in the next business or job that you have, using that to learn and progress.
Man, I feel like that is such a valuable skill to realize that you've got your revenue and your cost of goods, you've got a margin there, but most people just focus on those, right? Like, how much am I making here? But in reality, there's so many other costs that go into a business. And I feel like rarely do people underestimate how much they can make for buying and selling a product or developing a service and selling it. It's those overhead costs for marketing, for office, for SG&A, for technology, software costs. That stuff adds up, and it can really sink you. And it sounds like you've learned that. And what process and system do you go through now to make sure that if you launch a new business, or if you're thinking about a new idea, how do you even try to estimate what that overhead part of the P&L is going to look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I joke often that I have 2 brakes and 1 gas pedal. My 2 brakes are accounting degree and law degree, and my gas pedal is my MBA. And I think it's, for an entrepreneur, especially one that's very proactive, it's good to have 2 brake pedals and 1 gas pedal in there. But I do feel blessed from that background in accounting that, I look at income statements and P&Ls probably with an extra level of scrutiny. But I think, the thing that I've learned in a variety, because I've started so many different businesses, is you do start out with that gross margin number. And in a tech-enabled service businesses, which I've done a lot of, where human or salaries is the biggest expense, your gross margin's often 50%, because it's so much, your cogs are your people
Right.
up in there. So when you view those kind of businesses, you realize that your overhead has to be pretty small if you're going to have a good profit margin. I always built businesses, I wanted to have 20 or 30% profit margins. So if I knew I wanted that much profit and I knew where the gross margin was, you sort of just have to tailor your cost and sales and marketing expenses to fit that in those lower gross margin type companies. And often I call those execution plays. It really is about blocking and tackling. And I learned a great lesson from one of my CEOs, Jeff Welch, that he was in an industry that was normally 10% margins. He always ran businesses in that industry that were at 20% plus. I said, well, what was the trick? What did you different? He says, there is no one thing. It's a very disciplined focus on all of the little things. If you can improve your efficiency on 50 different items within the business and you're tracking those, you only have to make a marginal increase on each of those things. That the result of all of those is a major change. But there's rarely one easy lever to pull when you're doing that. But it's it's a regular quarterly and monthly. Do you look at expense creep? Do you look at meeting creep within your company? Do you reanalyze spends and ROIs on marketing on a regular basis and reallocate, based on those? And so it's probably identifying, 10 or 20 levers that really move your business, and it's marginal improvements on each of those lead to big improvements on EBITDA in those companies. So I think in businesses where you have a much higher gross margin, like SaaS companies where it could be 80 or 90% gross margins, you really have to look at lifetime value of customer and customer acquisition costs. That's where so many people get upside down, when they're either letting customers join for free, but you still have a cost to do that, or you don't realize it's costing me $50 to add each $20 of revenue. So there's probably 10 or 15 levers. They're different than the ones in those service or human capital related businesses, but managing and watching those levers and ratios to make sure that you're gonna, when you say we're gonna make it up with quantity, there's got to be an algorithm where that the revenue is higher than the expense. When you're going to make it up with quantity, you have to model it out forward and make sure that you can get there. Because often at the beginning of business, you are going to run in the red. You just have to know your model actually plays out at scale. And so I always have 3-year models going forward and sensitivity on different factors in that model to make sure that when you win by growing revenue, you actually win by growing profit at the same time.
I really like what you said about developing metrics and tracking it and picking 5, 10, 15, 20 different metrics that you improve by just 1%.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I feel like that's the secret sauce in business. Everybody thinks they can go out and sell more, but if you sell more and you lose more on the back end because you're not tracking and managing your metrics, it's a leaky bucket.
Yeah, and there's usually never one easy thing. That's what everyone's hoping for. Like when I talked to Jeff and was like, how are you at 20 and they're at 10? I was hoping for something that was ingenious and didn't take a lot of work. His answer was, it's a lot of work and it's incremental increases across the board. And people would often say to me, that business is just an execution play. And you're like, it is, and we're going to do it better. So we're going to make more money at out executing people, in what we're doing. And again, just marginal increases instead of a silver bullet to solve the problem.
Right. That's awesome, Brigham. I want to talk a little bit about leadership. You've been a leader for pretty much your whole life, maybe minus a couple instances where you worked for the family office and maybe when you had that W-2 job for the dog walking business. How do you wear the mantle of a leader, and what's your leadership style?
I think the style, parts of it have definitely evolved. Early on, we talked about my whole style was, if I work harder, I can make more. And so as a leader, I was always like, hey, if I can set the pace from a workload or work effort and work capacity, that's, I was willing to work alongside people and do the hard jobs. And even into my other businesses in New York and startups that I'd done, I was still willing to do anything. I'd take my rotation cleaning the bathroom at the office and whatever I did. Nothing was below me, and I was willing to work really hard. So I think that was sort of my initial first style. Before I knew what business was, I knew that if I worked hard, people would usually try to work as hard as I could or pick up their pace. And
in
so,
sports too, you learn that, right? You're big into football.
Yeah, I was captain in high school and a captain in college. And I think again, it was, if I'm working out in the gym every day, all off season, the rest of the guys are going to be in there, with me, and we all benefit from that. I think the other lesson I've learned over time, and I talked to my team about this concept I call scalable people. And that phrase came up in a conversation with Henry Eyring a few years ago, right after he became president at BYU Idaho. And I've thought a lot about what does it mean to be a scalable person, because in my opinion, it's scalable people build scalable businesses. It's not some crazy software that's out there. The software is only scalable if you get the right kind of people. And then, but when I define a scalable person, it's really three big things. And I try to do this as a leader, which kind of is the element that I've evolved that goes beyond just working harder than the other person. It's bringing all of your experience to the table in the company and being able to share that with everyone else to make them better. The second thing is to be humble and realize you don't know everything. One of our values at Emmersion is to be a truth seeker. And I think if we summarize that, we're more interested in getting to the right answer than being right. And so being open to learn and to get better is huge. And then the third one is, people often talk about lifelong learning, which I do think is important. I view it in a little bit different way from my employees and my personal perspective. As I'm a good CEO right now to a 45-person SaaS company. A year ago, we were 8 people. There are things that I had to change knowing we had to grow. The end of next year, we think we'll be at 120 or 140 people. I already have to look at now, what do I have to change in me to be the right person for my job a year from now when we're 3 times bigger. And so it's not just lifelong learning, it's saying we're going to grow and change. What do I need to grow and change to continue to be relevant? And so I try hard as a leader to be that scalable person, bring all my experience to the table, share it with my team. I try to be humble and seek truth as opposed to be right. And then look at what I need to change, because I've done a lot of companies way bigger than the company I'm running now from a headcount perspective, and even right now to a revenue perspective. But I've never been CEO of a SaaS company this big before. This is the first pure SaaS. So every day is new. In each revenue milestone, I've never been CEO of a SaaS company at X revenue. But when that doubles, I've also never been a CEO of so I have to evolve and change throughout that time. And then I'd say the last thing is I've realized that, again, back to that personal effort thing, my personal effort and abilities, I might be able to improve 10 or 15%. But if I focus my time on my leadership team of right now 13 people at VP and above and others, and I can help them each gain 15 to 20% improvement times 15 people, that's 300% improvement for there. There's always more benefit for me helping more people improve in their career path, in their capability, than just mine alone. So it doesn't mean I don't work on myself, but I've realized empowering my team and lifting as many people around me, that's where you get that benefit, as opposed to just Brigham can work harder than moving dirt than my guys in high school could move dirt. It's helping them become better at what they do.
So
that really
that's so awesome, Brigham. I feel like you've nailed the concept of let's make our people better so the business becomes better. And I'm curious, what types of things are you doing to make those folks better? Do you have like a consultant come in, or are you going out and learning things and sharing it with them, or how do you breed that culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my 2 co-founders, Jacob Burtis and Joe Tomco, my brother, from the beginning of the business, we decided that building culture was going to be intentional for us. Your culture will happen. If you don't do it intentionally, you'll end up with a culture. It just might not be the one you want. And so we developed a culture and a culture guide when it was just Jacob and I. We had 2 people. Oh, wow. And we're like, well, what do we want this to be? And we were very intentional about the way we looked at compensating people and looked at building the business. And so I want to talk about a couple of pillars. One is building intentional culture. Another one is the way you compensate people and think about compensation, and then the way you empower people. So we build a culture and values. We're an assessment company. We're an AI company. We're doing things that no one else is doing in the world right now. And so we built a set of values that spell the word test. So
Nice.
it's team player, entrepreneurs, solutioneers, and truth seekers. And we don't have time to go into all those right now, but those values actually mean a lot to us. And we define what those mean, and it actually drives behavior. So our quarterly performance reviews and part of our quarterly compensation, and we do compensate quarterly. I'll talk about that on bonuses. You have 8 questions, 2 related to each of those values, related to your work function. We also have a peer-to-peer program called Merit Bucks, where we employees recognize other employees for living those values, and they each get one of those to do a week, and so they can recognize those are all shared with everyone. We actually put a monetary value on those Merit Bucks, and it's paid out as a bonus for people who have recognized by their peers for living those values. So that kind of the intentionality of that culture plus some of that compensation were big. The other thing is every employee we have has stock options. Every employee also gets a quarterly bonus based on us hitting our recurring revenue targets for the quarter. And the mindset is that when we win long-term as a business, our employees should win long-term in the business. When we win short-term or near-term in the business, they should participate in that near-term. And so it keeps us all focused on the right things that the whole company is. And I often see asymmetry of loyalty in business where the business benefits at the expense of the employees. And I think if everyone benefits, maybe not to this exact same scale, but everyone benefits as the company improves, I think that's key. And then empowering the people. So we focus and we talk to them about our culture and give out our culture guide during the recruiting process. We want it to be polarizing. Like, if this seems weird or not a good fit, please don't come work here. If this resonates, you're the kind of person we want. We also talk to them about being scalable people. So if we've done a good job hiring scalable people that fit those 3 factors I talked about, plus fit our culture, then we should have people that we trust and empower to be able to grow. And so a lot of that talent development is getting the right people and giving them time and opportunity to progress. We also have great leaders that have come into our company that were leaders at Pluralsight and other places. And we're just now, as we speak, interviewing and recruiting for our VP of people, and that we want to institutionalize better this process that you asked about, how do I improve our people. We've done the best we can as a small business. As we scale, it's hard to just have it be a founder executive team led initiative. And now we're bringing in a strategic leader to help us scale the talent development component of what we do as a company. So I think we're doing good. We're not great. There's a lot of improvement to be done in all these areas for us.
That's awesome. Brigham, we're coming up on time, and I know you're a busy guy, so I want to be conscious of that. Can we end with a question about how would you, what advice do you give to younger folks that are coming up in their career or are considering being an entrepreneur? What have you shared over the years, and what do you tell to those young folks?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things that come to mind when you ask that question. I think one is to make sure you broaden your horizon to what entrepreneurship is. So I taught financing new ventures at the business school at BYU for a while, and you'd come into that class, and if I asked people what was entrepreneurship, it was like venture-backed Google or venture-backed Facebook. They had this very limited view of game-changing, revolutionary technologies that took hundreds of millions or billions of investment to build. But I said, that's awesome. And I do agree with that. But entrepreneurship is the accountant who worked at a firm who decides to go, open their own office on their own, or it's a lawyer that goes and builds their own law firm, or it can be, one of us who goes and buys a Subway sandwich franchise and runs that business that way. It can be an eBay or Amazon store on the side. I think, and it can even be, entrepreneurs within the business. So I think broadening your horizon, it doesn't mean you have to leave your job, raise a bunch of money to go do something. Being an entrepreneur, there's a much, broader opportunity. I think if we realize that, then many more of us realize we are entrepreneurs and can go down that path. Second thing I'd say is most good business ideas come from personal experience. So people who skip out on either education or employment opportunities often miss out on the experiences where you're probably going to be exposed to great ideas. Most businesses are slight improvements on something that's already happening. You may be in a company and you're like, I could do that a little bit better. They're not willing to change. So you go leave that company, start your own business, tweak the model a little bit and go from there. There's very rarely we're sitting around twiddling our thumbs and fingers and come up with a magical idea that's better than everyone who's, in the industry's been around for 100 years. There's probably things we don't know. And so I think it's okay to bide your time a little bit as an entrepreneur to learn and to get exposure, but you need to start being curious and looking at, how could that be done better? Or when you're frustrated with something, your frustration should turn into, well, what if there was a software that did this? Mm-hmm. And that's where good ideas come from, is our frustration or pain that we're feeling personally, and we come up with an idea to fix it. And so I kind of dumb it down. I think being an entrepreneur is a lot more basic than we think it is, and comes from day-to-day experiences in our lives. And it isn't always and most often is not venture-backed, change the world type things. Most entrepreneurship is iterative improvement to existing things out there.
That's awesome. Brigham, gosh, we talked about so many great things, from leadership to, the lowest lows, and now to so many highs that you've had in your career. I really appreciate you coming on today and joining our show, the Achieving Greatness Show. And I truly think you are achieving greatness. Hope to have you on again soon. Check in with you maybe a year from now and see you've got thousands of employees. I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah, well, we hope so. Yeah, keep an eye out. Rapid growth, and probably see some things in the news here in the next couple months, both from a product and financing perspective.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. We'll let you get back to your busy day and your team, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks again.